The morning of my sister's wedding, I stood in the parking lot of a Serenbe estate in a cream blazer I'd bought with my own money. And I thought about the last thing my mother ever said to me that mattered. Not the thing she said when she saw me that day. We'll get there. I mean, the thing she said 9 years ago, in our kitchen in Buckhead, while the dishwasher ran, and my college acceptance letter sat unopened on the counter between us. "Maya, you're not ugly because of how you look." She said it so quietly, like she was doing me a favor. I was 20 years old. I had just gotten into Georgia State's design program. I thought I was bringing her good news. I think about that moment more than I should, not because it destroyed me, though it came close, but because of how calm she was, like she'd rehearsed it, like she'd been waiting for the right time to explain something to me that she thought I needed to understand about myself. My mother, Dr. Elaine Chen Whitfield, chief of cardiology at Emory University Medical Center, has never once raised her voice at me. She didn't need to. She had other tools. Let me tell you what our house was like. We lived in Buckhead, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are maintained by crews who arrive before you wake up, and every driveway has at least one car that costs more than most people's annual salary. My father, Dr. Raymond Whitfield, was an oncologist. My mother was the cardiology chief. My little sister Sophia was 17 and already shadowing residents at Emory on weekends. Already pre-med. Already everything they'd wanted their daughters to be. And then there was me. I wasn't a bad student. I wasn't troubled or rebellious. I drew constantly. In the margins of my notebooks, on paper bags, on the backs of envelopes. I saw shapes in things. I thought about how logos worked, how color made people feel things before they realized they were feeling them. I thought that was something. My mother thought it was a phase. For most of my childhood, the dynamic was subtle enough that I could explain it away. Mom is just busy. She's under pressure. She pushes because she cares. Sophia is younger. She needs more attention right now. I told myself those things for years. The first time I couldn't anymore was at one of my parents' dinner parties, the kind they hosted every few months for Emory colleagues and hospital board members. I was 16. I stood in the kitchen doorway in a dress I'd picked out myself, listening to my mother introduce us to a woman named Dr. Patricia Holt. "And this is Sophia," she said, her whole voice warming. "Our future physician." Dr. Holt smiled. "How wonderful." My mother gestured toward me, without quite looking at me. "And this is Maya, our creative one." The pause before creative lasted less than a second, but Dr. Holt heard it. I know because her smile shifted. Just slightly, the way people's do when they're compensating for something awkward. And she said, "How lovely," and turned back to Sophia. I went upstairs and drew for 3 hours and didn't come back down until the guests were gone. I told myself it was nothing. It was something. The person who saw me clearly, the only one, for a long time, was my grandfather, Thomas Chen, my mother's father, a retired physician who'd built something modest and lasting in Decatur and spent his retirement reading history books and watching Braves games, and every single time I had an art show or a school project displayed anywhere, showing up. He came to everyone, even the small ones, especially the small ones. He'd stand in front of whatever I'd made and study it the way he used to study X-rays, carefully, with real attention, and then he'd say something specific, not "great job, honey," something specific. "The way you use the negative space there, that's intentional, isn't it? That's smart." He was the only person in my family who used the word smart about me without qualifying it. When I got the Georgia State acceptance letter, he was the first person I called. He said, "I knew before you did." Hey, before I go further, if you've ever had someone in your family make you feel like the lesser version of yourself, you already know exactly where this story is going. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you stay for stories like this one, subscribe. This one doesn't end the way they expected. I promise you that. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Decatur the August after graduation. My parents helped me carry 2 boxes. My mother spent most of that afternoon on her phone. My father hugged me at the door and said, "Call us if you need anything," in the voice people use when they're hoping you won't. Sophia texted me a single emoji, a small waving hand. I told myself that was fine. People moved out all the time. Families adjusted. This was normal. 6 months later, Grandpa Thomas got his diagnosis. Early dementia, caught reasonably early, managed carefully, but progressive. I started driving out to his facility in Decatur every Sunday. We'd sit on the porch if the weather was decent, and he'd tell me stories about patients he'd had decades ago, or ask me about whatever I was working on, or sometimes just sit quietly while the Georgia afternoon came and went around us. My mother visited once a month, sometimes less. She was busy. She was always busy. When Grandpa Thomas died, quietly, on a Tuesday in February, while I was at work, I found out from my friend Danny, who saw the obituary notification on her phone and called me immediately because she knew, before I did, that my family wouldn't. She was right. I called my mother. Voicemail. I called Sophia. She picked up, said, "I know. It's really sad. Mom's handling the arrangements," and then said she had to go. I sat in my car in the parking garage of the design firm where I worked and stared at the concrete wall in front of me for a very long time. They didn't call you, I kept thinking. They didn't call you. And then, 2 weeks later, came the law firm. Peachtree Street, 14th floor. Dark wood paneling, and the smell of old money, and the quiet authority of a place where important things happen to people who don't always expect them. My mother had called me the night before, actually called, the first time in weeks, to tell me there was a reading of Grandpa Thomas's estate and that I should attend. She said it the way she said most things, efficient, informational, no warmth to locate anywhere in the sentence. I thought, she's including me. Maybe this is the beginning of something different. I should have known better. I was 21 years old and still learning that hope can be its own kind of trap. The conference room had a long mahogany table and too many chairs, and a lawyer named Mr. Braddock, who wore a navy tie and read from documents in a flat, practiced voice. My mother sat at the head of the table like she belonged there. My father sat beside her. Sophia sat beside him. I sat at the far end, close to the door, which felt, in retrospect, like the room already knew what was going to happen. Mr. Braddock had barely opened his folder when my mother raised one hand. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to address something." She looked down the table, at me. "We've decided, as a family, that Maya won't be included in the estate conversation. She's chosen her own path. She isn't part of the legacy your grandfather built. I want to be clear that this isn't personal." The room was very quiet. I looked at my father. He was studying the table. I looked at Sophia. She looked at the window. It isn't personal. As though something could cut that cleanly and still leave that much blood. Mr. Braddock cleared his throat. "Miss Whitfield, if you'd like to wait outside." I stood up before he finished the sentence. I wasn't going to let them watch me be asked to leave. I was going to leave on my own terms, even if those terms were just, "Do not cry until you reach the elevator." I made it to the elevator. I didn't make it to the lobby. I drove home to Decatur in February, rain with the defroster on and the radio off, and I sat in my parking lot for a long time. And I thought about Grandpa Thomas showing up to every art show, and the way he'd said "I knew before you did," and the way my mother had used the word legacy, like it was something I'd forfeited. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from the law firm, not from Mr. Braddock, from a different attorney entirely, someone named Harold Osei, requesting a private meeting at my earliest convenience regarding a specific provision in the Thomas Chen estate. I put the letter in the kitchen drawer. I didn't open it for 6 months. And whatever was inside that envelope, whatever my grandfather had arranged without telling a single person in that conference room, was the beginning of everything. Grief is quieter than people tell you it is. Nobody warns you about the specific silence of it, the way you can go to work and answer emails and heat up soup and fold laundry and do every ordinary thing a person does while something inside you is completely, utterly still. Like a clock that's stopped and is just hanging there on the wall, hands frozen, pretending to be furniture. That was me for the first 3 months after the law firm. I went to work. I came home. I drew things I didn't care about for clients I could barely remember. My apartment in Decatur had big windows that faced east, and sometimes in the mornings I'd stand in front of them with coffee and watch the neighborhood wake up. Dog walkers, school buses, a man across the street who watered his plants at the same time every day, and I'd think, everyone out there has a family that functions. Everyone out there has somewhere they belong. I knew that wasn't true. But grief makes you stupid in specific ways. Danny saved my life that winter. Not dramatically. She didn't pull me back from any edge. She just kept showing up, knocking on my door with takeout from the Thai place on College Avenue, making me leave the apartment on Saturdays, sitting on my kitchen floor with me at midnight while I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry since the parking garage. She never said they don't deserve you. She knew I wasn't ready to believe it. She just stayed. That's the thing about real friendship. It doesn't try to fix the unfixable. It just refuses to leave you alone with it. By March, I was functioning. By May, I was working. By August, the August after Grandpa Thomas died, 8 months after that law firm conference room, I was sitting at my desk at the design firm in Midtown, finishing a rebrand for a dermatology group in Sandy Springs, when I remembered the letter. It came to me the way forgotten things do, sideways, without warning. I was looking at a logo I'd designed and thinking about negative space, and then suddenly, I was thinking about Grandpa Thomas, saying that's intentional, isn't it? And then I was thinking about the kitchen drawer. I left work early for the first time since I'd started that job. The envelope was exactly where I'd left it. I stood at my kitchen counter for a full minute before I opened it. What if it's nothing? What if it's an administrative formality, and there's nothing in it, and this is just another door that goes nowhere? I opened it anyway. Harold Osei, attorney at law. Office on Peachtree Street. Different building than Mr. Braddock. 3 floors higher. The letter was 2 paragraphs. Professional, measured, carefully worded. It said there was a provision in Thomas Chen's estate that had been filed separately from the primary will, a codicil, and that the provision named me specifically, and that he strongly encouraged me to come in at my earliest availability, as the matter was time-sensitive. I read it 3 times. Then I called the number at the bottom. Harold Osei was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected. Someone older, maybe. More formal. Instead, he was around 40. With reading glasses he kept taking on and off, a desk organized in a way that suggested genuine system rather than performance, and a quality I recognized immediately because I didn't encounter it often. He was someone who said exactly what he meant. He shook my hand, offered me water, sat across from me. Your grandfather filed this codicil 14 months before he passed, he said. He came to me directly, without involving the family estate attorney. That was intentional. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a legal document. Clean, witnessed, notarized. And a sealed envelope with my name on the front in my grandfather's handwriting. Maya. Sharp one. I put my hand flat on that envelope and did not open it yet. What's the provision? I asked. Harold took his glasses off. Your grandfather owned a building, he said. A medical office building on a corner lot in Decatur. He'd had it for 30 years, leased it to a rotating roster of small practices. The family was aware of the property but considered it low value, sentimental. The primary estate assets, cash, the Buckhead property, investment accounts, went through Mr. Braddock's process. And the building? Your grandfather left it to you. 25% equity stake, with a right of first refusal clause on the remaining 75% held in a separate trust he established. I looked at him. Why didn't this come up at the reading? Because, Harold said carefully, the codicil was filed through my office, not Mr. Braddock's, and no one in your family requested a full estate inventory. The room was very quiet. They didn't look, I thought. They were so certain there was nothing worth finding that they didn't even look. What's the building worth? I asked. Harold put his glasses back on. At the time of filing, modest. Perhaps 300,000, in a depressed market. And now? He paused in the way people pause when they want to give you a moment before something lands. Maya, he said. Atlanta's medical real estate corridor has shifted considerably in the last few years. That corner lot has been approached by 2 separate hospital networks interested in the area for development. Current conservative valuation. He turned a paper toward me. I looked at the number. I looked at it for a long time. $2.4 million. My grandfather, who came to every art show, who said I knew before you did, who sat with me on that porch in Decatur every Sunday while his memory slowly dimmed, had left me a piece of Atlanta worth $2.4 million. And my family had never thought to check. Maybe you've been in a room where you realized someone had quietly believed in you long before you believed in yourself. I don't know what that felt like for you, but for me, sitting in Harold Osei's office, it felt like something cracking open, not painfully, more like a window. I asked Harold if I could open the letter alone. He stepped out, closed the door behind him. The envelope took me a moment. Grandpa Thomas's handwriting was slightly unsteady. He'd written this after the diagnosis, when his hands were still reliable but not perfectly so. The letter was 2 pages. I'm not going to tell you everything he wrote. Some things are just mine. But I'll tell you the last line. I leave this to you because you are the only one who understands that value is not always visible. You will know when the time is right. Trust the building. Trust yourself. I folded it back up and put it in my bag and sat in that conference room for a while. When Harold came back in, I asked him one question. If I wanted to retain you, not just for the building, but ongoing, is that something you'd consider? He smiled. Small, professional, real. I was hoping you'd ask that, he said. The next 5 years were not dramatic. That's the part of these stories that nobody tells you. That real transformation is mostly boring from the outside. It looks like early mornings and client meetings and spreadsheets and small decisions that don't feel important at the time. I stayed at the design firm for another 18 months. Then I left. I took 3 clients with me and one very specific plan: to build something that could not be dismissed. Not by a room full of physicians. Not by anyone. I named my studio Whitfield Creative. The name was deliberate. I had thought about distancing myself from it, choosing something neutral, untraceable to the family I was no longer speaking to. But I didn't want to hide. I wanted my name on something real. Something that would exist in Atlanta's professional landscape and be undeniable. The studio's first year was hard. The second year was better. The third year, I landed a contract with a regional hospital network to redesign their entire patient-facing identity. Signage, digital, print, brand voice. It was the largest project I'd ever managed. Here's the thing about growing up adjacent to medicine. You absorb the language. You know how physicians think, what they value, how they speak to each other versus how they speak to patients. I understood both worlds. Clinicians trusted me faster than they trusted other designers. I knew what continuity of care meant. I knew that the color of a hospital waiting room affects patient anxiety. I knew things I'd absorbed by osmosis for 20 years without realizing I was learning them. My mother had called medicine the family identity. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't understand how I'd inherited it. Meanwhile, the building sat in Decatur, appreciating. Harold and I met quarterly. I didn't rush the sale. He'd advised patience, and I'd learned to trust his instincts. We waited while the Atlanta medical corridor continued its slow, expensive shift northward. We waited while both hospital networks increased their interest. We waited while the corner lot became exactly what Grandpa Thomas had believed it would become: undeniable. I visited it once, just parked across the street and looked at it. A modest 2-story building, aging exterior, a dental practice on the ground floor, a dermatologist upstairs. Nothing remarkable to look at. This is what he saw when he looked at me, I thought. Something that didn't look like much yet. I drove home. I learned about Sophia's engagement the way I learned most things about my family by then, through Danny, who followed them on social media so I didn't have to. She sent me a screenshot on a Wednesday evening. Atlanta Magazine had run a small feature. Sophia Chen Whitfield, completing her orthopedic surgery residency at Emory, engaged to Dr. Marcus Hayes, son of Arthur and Beverly Hayes, of the Hayes Orthopedic Partners Group. The photo showed Sophia radiant in a cream blouse. My mother beside her, hand on her shoulder. My father slightly behind them, smiling his conflict-avoidant smile. And in the article's background detail, the wedding would be held at Bay in the fall. I stared at the photo for a long time. Hayes Orthopedic Partners. I knew that name. I opened my client database and searched it. And there it was. An inquiry that had come in 6 weeks earlier through a referral. Hayes Orthopedic Partners. Looking to rebrand ahead of a new Buckhead expansion. Looking for a design firm that understood medical culture. Looking, specifically, for someone who could also advise on real estate integration for their new facility development in the Decatur corridor. The Decatur corridor. My building's corner lot was in the Decatur corridor. I sat at my desk for a very long time. Then I called Harold Osei. He picked up on the second ring. "Harold," I said, "I need you to look at something." I told him about the Hayes inquiry, about the expansion, about the location overlap. There was a pause on his end. I could hear him thinking. "Maya," he said finally, "do they know who you are?" "No," I said. "I'm just Maya Whitfield." founder of Whitfield Creative. Another pause. And the wedding? Fall, I said. Serenbe. Harold was quiet for a moment, that felt much longer than it was. I think, he said carefully, we may want to revisit the timing on the building. I looked out my window at Atlanta, doing what Atlanta does. Building, expanding, moving, indifferent to every personal history playing out within it. I think so too, I said. I hadn't decided anything yet, not consciously, but something had shifted, the way a door shifts when someone on the other side reaches for the handle. I pulled up the Hayes Orthopedic Inquiry, and I wrote back, I want to be honest about something. There was a version of me, the 20-year-old version, sitting in a parking garage crying into her steering wheel, who imagined revenge as something loud, a confrontation, a scene. The kind of moment where you say everything you never got to say and watch the person who hurt you finally understand what they did. That version of me would not have recognized what I actually built, because what I built wasn't loud. It wasn't a scene. It was something much quieter and much harder. A life so real and so solid that the truth of it couldn't be argued with. You can dismiss a person. You cannot dismiss a signed contract. That's what I understood, somewhere between year 3 and year 4 of building Whitfield Creative, sitting in meetings with hospital administrators and real estate attorneys and people who took me seriously because I had earned it one invoice at a time. You don't beat people like my mother by out-arguing them. You beat them by becoming undeniable. My first meeting with Hayes Orthopedic Partners was on a Tuesday in late February, 7 months before the wedding. The office was in a glass building in Buckhead, of course it was, with a reception desk staffed by someone who offered me sparkling water and called me Ms. Whitfield, with the kind of automatic respect that still surprised me, 5 years into being someone it was directed at. I'd done my preparation. I knew the group's financials, their patient volume, their brand positioning relative to competitors. I knew their Buckhead expansion timeline. I knew their Decatur corridor interest was genuine and urgent. They needed a property anchor within 18 months. What I also knew, and did not volunteer, that I owned a piece of exactly the property they needed. I wasn't hiding it. I simply hadn't been asked. The meeting was run by the group's operations director, a sharp woman named Denise Albright, who'd been with Hayes for 11 years and had the particular competence of someone who holds everything together while the principals take the credit. I liked her immediately. Marcus Hayes came in 20 minutes late, apologized without embarrassment, and shook my hand with the easy confidence of someone who has never once walked into a room and wondered if he belonged there. He was tall, direct, genuinely engaged. He asked real questions about our portfolio and actually listened to the answers. He made a joke about medical branding that was funnier than it should have been given the context. He has no idea, I thought, watching him review our case studies. He's looking at my work, and he doesn't know that in 7 months he's going to be standing in a Serenbe courtyard, about to marry into the family that locked me out of a law firm conference room. I smiled when he made his joke. I answered his questions. I was completely professional. I was also paying very close attention. The contract with Hayes Orthopedic came through in March. Full rebrand for the Buckhead expansion. Identity system, environmental design, patient communication materials. And a secondary engagement, consulting on their facility development options in the Decatur corridor, where they were still searching for a property anchor. Harold and I had a long conversation the night the contract landed. You need to disclose the building eventually, he said. Not yet. There's no legal obligation at this stage. But before any real estate conversation becomes formal, I know. And the family connection. I know, Harold. A pause. Maya, what exactly are you planning? I thought about how to answer that honestly. I'm not planning a confrontation, I said. I'm not going to show up at that wedding and make a scene. I stopped. That's not who I want to be. Then what? I want to walk into that room as exactly who I am. No more, no less. And I want them to see it. Harold was quiet for a moment. That, he said finally, is either very wise or very complicated. Probably both, I said. The work with Hayes was good. That part I didn't expect. I expected it to feel strategic, transactional, something I was doing toward an outcome. Instead, I found myself genuinely invested. Denise Albright was a pleasure to work with. The expansion project had real design challenges that interested me. Marcus, in our working sessions, turned out to be someone who cared about patient experience in a way that wasn't performative. Once, in a brand review meeting, he said something that stopped me cold. We were discussing the patient intake experience, how the space should feel to someone walking in for the first time, probably scared, probably in pain. People make decisions about whether they're safe, he said, within about 30 seconds of entering a medical space, before anyone speaks to them, before they fill out a form. The design either tells them they're seen, or it doesn't. I wrote that down. I thought about Grandpa Thomas's waiting room at his old practice, the one I'd visited as a child. Warm lighting, actual plants, chairs that faced each other instead of a wall, a front desk positioned low so staff could make eye contact with seated patients. He'd designed that intentionally. I'd never realized until that moment. The design either tells them they're seen, or it doesn't. I looked at Marcus Hayes and thought, you have no idea that your fiancé's family made me feel invisible for 20 years, and you just accidentally said the thing that explains exactly why it mattered. April. The Decatur corridor conversation became formal. Denise sent me a brief, 3 properties under consideration, preliminary assessments, budget parameters. I read through it on a Sunday morning on my Inman Park balcony, with coffee going cold beside me. The second property on the list had a familiar address, not my building, adjacent to it. 3 lots down, same street, comparable footprint. Hayes had identified it independently and rated it highly. I called Harold that afternoon. They're looking at the lot 3 doors down, I said. I see. My building is better positioned, better corner access, larger footprint, established utilities infrastructure. Yes, if I bring it to the table now, as a potential alternative, it's a legitimate business conversation. It's the right move for the client. It is, Harold said. It is also the moment when you become a named stakeholder in a development project with the family your sister is marrying into. I know. Before the wedding. Silence on his end. Then, I'll prepare the disclosure documents. We do this properly, Maya. Everything above board. No surprises that could be characterized as manipulation later. That's exactly what I want. And it was. I want to be clear about that. Not because I need to defend myself, but because it matters to me that you understand the difference. I wasn't engineering a trap. I was conducting my business. The fact that my business and my family's social world were about to occupy the same room was not something I manufactured. It was something my grandfather arranged 14 months before he died, from a desk in an attorney's office on Peachtree Street, because he knew something the rest of them didn't. He knew I'd be ready when the time came. I disclosed the building to Hayes in early May. In a conference room, with Harold present, I laid out the full picture, my ownership stake, the trust structure, the property's history, the valuation, and the reason I hadn't raised it initially. I'd wanted to establish our working relationship on its merits before introducing a variable that complicated it. Marcus and Denise listened without interrupting. When I finished, Marcus looked at the property documentation for a long moment. Then he looked at me. This is a better site. Yes, I said. It is. Why didn't you lead with it? Because I needed you to trust my work before you trusted my asset, I said. In that order. He thought about that. Then he almost smiled. Fair. The development conversation moved forward. Formal. Clean. Harold managed every document with the precision of someone who understood that every line might matter later. By June, Hayes Orthopedic Partners and Whitfield Creative were co-signatories in a preliminary development agreement on the Decatur property. My name was in the foundation of something that would exist in Atlanta's medical landscape for decades. I thought about my mother's word, legacy. Beverly Hayes called me on a Thursday evening in August. I didn't recognize the number. I almost didn't answer. Ms. Whitfield, this is Beverly Hayes, Marcus's mother. I hope this isn't an intrusion. I got your number from Denise. Her voice was warm, southern, the kind of warmth that was genuine, rather than performed. I'd met her briefly at a Hayes Group event in June. She'd asked thoughtful questions about the Decatur project and remembered specific details when we crossed paths again. Not at all, I said carefully. I'll get to the point. I'm terrible at small talk. I've been so impressed by your work with the group. Marcus speaks very highly of you. And I've been thinking. A brief pause. Sophia mentioned once that she had an older sister. I don't know your family situation. And please tell me if I'm overstepping. But the wedding is in October, and it occurred to me that a sister should at least be invited. The kitchen was very quiet around me. She doesn't know, I thought. She genuinely doesn't know anything. She's just a woman trying to do the right thing. Mrs. Hayes, I said slowly, that's very kind of you. Beverly, please. Beverly. I paused. I appreciate you saying that. Can I think about it? Of course, she said. No pressure whatsoever. I have 2 boys and no daughters, and I suppose I'm sentimental about sisters. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called Harold. Then I called Danny. Danny said, Maya, you have to go. I know, I said. Not for them, she said. For you, I know. Wear something incredible. I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in weeks. I'm working on it. I want to tell you what I was thinking the morning of the wedding. I was not thinking about revenge. I was not rehearsing speeches. I was not imagining the look on my mother's face. I was thinking about Grandpa Thomas on that porch in Decatur, the last good Sunday, before his memory started slipping away faster than we could hold on to it. The way the afternoon light came through the oak trees. The way he'd said, completely unprompted, "You're going to be fine, you know." Not fine like, okay, fine like, real, substantial, the kind of person who lasts. I hadn't known what to do with that at 21. I drove to Serenbe on a clear October morning with Harold Osei's number in my phone and a cream blazer I'd bought with my own money, and I thought about being substantial. The estate came into view through the trees. White lights in the oaks, a string quartet warming up somewhere inside, the organized elegance of a wedding my family had planned for the daughter they'd chosen. I parked, sat for a moment. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You sure you want to do this? I didn't recognize the number then. I'd find out later it was my father. I looked up at the building, inhaled slowly. I'm not here to ruin anything, I thought. I'm here to exist, fully, in front of them, and let the truth of my life speak for itself. I got out of the car and walked toward the doors. My mother saw me first. She was in the courtyard near the entrance, speaking to a woman I didn't recognize, champagne in hand, wearing the kind of structured navy dress she'd worn to every important occasion since I was 12. She looked exactly the same, controlled, polished, certain. The moment she saw me, the certainty flickered. Just for a second. Then it hardened back into something colder. She crossed the courtyard. The other woman melted away with the instincts of someone who has witnessed enough Chen Whitfield family dynamics to know when to disappear. My mother stopped 3 feet from me. She looked me over. The blazer, the heels, the way I was standing, with the clinical efficiency of someone conducting an assessment. Then, quietly, the way she'd always done it. Why is this defect here? 9 years. 9 years since she'd said something similar in a kitchen in Buckhead while a dishwasher ran and an acceptance letter sat unopened. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. The way you look at something you've been afraid of for a long time and finally aren't. And I said, "Hi, Mom." 2 words. Completely calm. Her eyes narrowed. Before she could respond, I heard Sophia's voice behind me. She was in a bridal cover-up, hair half-pinned, mimosa in hand, every inch of her radiating the particular confidence of someone who has never once imagined the ground moving under them. She saw me and stopped walking. Then her face did something I hadn't expected, something that moved through surprise and landed somewhere closer to fear. Not of me, of what my presence meant, of what it said about the story she'd been telling herself. "You are not invited." Flat. Final. The voice of someone who learned certainty from our mother. I looked at my sister, the girl I'd grown up with, who'd learned to disappear into silence because silence was the only safe language in our house. And I felt something complicated move through me, that was not anger. "I know," I said. "I came anyway." The courtyard was doing that thing spaces do when something important is happening. Sound pulling back, peripheral movement slowing, everyone nearby suddenly finding reasons to look elsewhere. And then I heard his voice. Maya. Marcus Hayes, crossing the courtyard toward me, with the open warmth of a man who had no idea what room he was walking into. His face was completely unguarded, the face of someone who sees a trusted colleague at his wedding and feels uncomplicated pleasure about it. "You made it," He stopped. His eyes moved from me to Sophia, then to my mother, then back to Sophia. The math was happening in real time on his face. The last name, the resemblance, the way everyone in this courtyard had gone very still. "Wait," he said slowly. "You two." Sophia's mimosa was motionless in her hand. My mother had gone the particular shade of pale that I recognized as the precursor to controlled fury. Marcus looked at me, really looked, and I watched him put it together. Every professional conversation, every meeting, every document with my name on it, laid over this courtyard, this family, this moment. "Sophia," he said carefully, "is this her sister?" I said. "Yes." The word landed like a stone into still water. Marcus straightened. He was a haze, whatever else he was. He'd been raised in a family where public behavior was non-negotiable. He turned to my mother, and the warmth in his face had shifted into something measured and firm. "How dare you speak to her that way? Quiet, certain. This woman is our lead creative partner. She's a named stakeholder in the Decatur development. She has been—" "Marcus," Sophia's voice. He stopped. The courtyard was completely still. I looked at all of them. My mother, my sister, the man about to join this family, the oak trees strung with white lights, the Georgia October sky going gold above us. And I said, softly, "You have no idea, do you? Not to any one of them. To all of them. To the version of this family that had existed in their own certainty for 9 years, undisturbed, while I became someone they never thought to track." My mother opened her mouth, and that was the moment Harold Osei came through the courtyard entrance, briefcase in hand, and said, "Ms. Whitfield. Sorry I'm late." I had not planned for Harold to be dramatic about it. He wasn't, actually. That's the thing about Harold Osei. He has the particular quality of someone who understands that facts, presented cleanly, are more devastating than any performance. He walked into that Serenbe courtyard in a charcoal suit with a briefcase and the calm energy of a man who had prepared for exactly this and found nothing about it surprising. He shook my hand, nodded at the group. My mother looked at him the way she looked at anything she hadn't anticipated, with a stillness that was actually a kind of furious recalibration. "Who is this?" she said. "My attorney," I said. The word landed differently than I expected, not dramatically. Just solidly, like something real being set on a table. Marcus was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not anger, not confusion anymore, something more careful than either. He was a haze. He understood, instinctively, that the presence of an attorney at a social event meant the social event had just changed categories. "Perhaps," Harold said, looking at my mother with the courteous firmness of someone who has never once been intimidated by a physician, "we could find somewhere slightly more private." We ended up in a small anteroom off the main corridor, one of those spaces wedding venues keep for exactly the kind of conversations families have when the performance of a perfect day briefly cracks open. White walls, 2 upholstered chairs, a window overlooking the gardens. My mother stood. My father had appeared from somewhere. I'd felt him at the edge of the courtyard scene, hovering, and now he was here, in the doorway, looking at me with an expression that had traveled a long distance to arrive at something close to reckoning. Sophia had not come inside. I'd seen her at the courtyard edge, still holding the mimosa, watching us move toward the building. Her wedding was in 4 hours. She had choices to make about how to spend the time between then and now, and apparently standing in an anteroom with a lawyer was not one of them. I understood that. I didn't hold it against her. Not yet. Harold opened the briefcase. He's methodical. He laid 3 documents on the small table between us, with the precision of someone who has ordered them intentionally. "Dr. Chen Whitfield," he said, and my mother's chin lifted slightly at the professional address. "I represent your daughter Maya, in several capacities. I want to be transparent about why I'm here and what I'd like you to understand. This is not the time or place. It's the time and place Maya chose," Harold said, without sharpness, "and she has that right. Please." My mother closed her mouth. The first document was the codicil. Harold slid it toward her. The original filing, notarized, witnessed. My grandfather's signature at the bottom, in the slightly unsteady hand of a man who had known his time was shortening and had used what remained of it carefully. My mother picked it up. I watched her read it. I had imagined this moment many times over the years, the moment she learned what her father had done. And I'd imagined anger, denial, some version of the cold dismissal she'd used on me my entire life. What I hadn't imagined was what actually happened. She went very still, the particular stillness of someone encountering a fact that doesn't fit the story they've been living inside. She read it twice, maybe 3 times. Her eyes moved over the document with the focused attention of a cardiologist reading a scan, looking for the error, the misinterpretation, the thing that would make this mean something other than what it clearly meant. There was no error. My grandfather had loved me specifically enough to plan for my protection. The property, Harold said, is currently valued at $2.4 million. Maya has retained full ownership interest. A preliminary development agreement, co-signed by Hayes Orthopedic Partners, was executed in June. My father made a sound, not a word, just a sound. My mother set the document down. She did not look at me. He never said anything, she said. It came out quieter than I expected, less like an accusation and more like something escaping. No, I said. He didn't. She looked up then, and for the first time in my memory, for the first time in 30 years of being her daughter, I saw something on my mother's face that I didn't have a name for. It wasn't regret, exactly. It was more like the specific vertigo of realizing that someone you thought you understood completely had been holding a part of themselves back from you, that your certainty about who they were had been, all along, incomplete. Her father had looked at his eldest granddaughter and seen something worth protecting, and he hadn't told Elaine, because he'd known she wouldn't understand, because he'd understood his own daughter, finally and completely, in a way that broke something open in the room. He left it to her, my mother said. To herself, almost. Yes, Harold said simply. My father asked to speak with me alone. My mother left the room without argument, which was itself a kind of answer. She had the bearing of someone who needed air and space, and the privacy to process something she would never, publicly, admit had shaken her. Harold stepped out. My father and I were left in the anteroom with the white walls and the garden window and 9 years of accumulated silence between us. He looked older than I remembered. That surprised me, even though it shouldn't have. Time had moved for him too, invisibly, the way it does for people you're not watching. He sat down in one of the upholstered chairs. After a moment, I sat in the other. He didn't make excuses. I want to give him that. Raymond Whitfield has many flaws, but he's never been a man who constructs elaborate justifications for himself. He knows what he is. He just hasn't always known what to do about it. I let her make every decision, he said. About the family. About you and Sophia. About everything domestic. I told myself it was because she was better at it. That was a lie I was comfortable with. I looked at my father, this man who had touched my shoulder in a law firm hallway, and then followed his wife without looking back. The real reason, he said, is that choosing would have cost me something, and I didn't want to pay it. The garden outside the window was very still. October light on Georgia grass. I needed you to choose me, I said. Once. Just once. He had no answer. He didn't pretend to. He just sat with it, the weight of what he hadn't done, the specific and permanent shape of it, the way certain failures don't become less true over time, they just become more clearly what they are. We sat together in the anteroom for a few minutes, not talking, not reconciling. I want to be honest about that. There was no moment where it became okay. There was just 2 people sitting in the same room for the first time in 9 years, with the truth on the table between them, and the strange, quiet relief of no longer pretending. He stood to leave. At the door, he paused. He talked about you, he said. Your grandfather. At the end, when his memory was going, he'd lose track of Sophia sometimes. Couldn't always place her name, but he always knew you. He left before I could respond. I sat alone in that white room for a while. Beverly Hayes found me in the hallway 20 minutes later. She had the look of a woman who had been briefed by her husband, Arthur Hayes Sr., had the measured, recalibrating expression of a man reassessing a business alliance. But Beverly herself seemed less concerned with the professional implications than with the human ones. She took both my hands in hers, looked at me directly. I didn't know, she said. I want you to understand that. If I had known there was, that your family had. She stopped, tried again. I'm sorry you weren't welcomed here, the way you should have been. I looked at Beverly Hayes, this woman who had called me on a Thursday evening out of nothing but a sentimental instinct about sisters, and felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for a long time. You welcomed me, I said. That mattered. She held my hands for another moment. Then she straightened, and the warmth in her face took on something additionally purposeful. Go find your sister, she said. Before the ceremony, please. Sophia was in the bridal suite, a room at the far end of the venue, white and quiet, smelling of gardenias and hairspray. Her maid of honor and 2 bridesmaids had apparently been asked to give her a moment, because when I knocked and she said come in, the room held only her. She was fully dressed. The wedding gown was simple and extraordinary, the kind of thing that looks effortless because every decision about it was deliberate. Her hair was finished. She was sitting at the vanity mirror, not looking at herself, just sitting, hands in her lap. She looked up when I came in. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Sophia and I had not been in the same room in 9 years. She was 31 now. She had her mother's precision and her grandfather's eyes, and something else, something I'd only glimpsed once or twice growing up, a kind of private grief that she'd learned early to keep very carefully managed. Did you come here to ruin this? She asked it without hostility, genuinely asking. No, I said. Then why? I thought about what I'd planned to say. I had planned something, somewhere in the months of preparation, some version of a clean, honest statement of purpose. Standing in that room, looking at my sister in her wedding dress, none of it seemed necessary. Grandpa Thomas came to every single one of my art shows, I said. Every one, even the small ones. Even when nobody else did, he'd stand in front of whatever I'd made and actually look at it. Sophia was very still, and I thought, if he could show up for me in a room full of people who didn't care, maybe I could show up for you. Even now, even like this. Something moved across my sister's face. She looked down at her hands. I didn't call you, she said. When he died, I should have called you. Yes, I didn't know how. She paused. That's not an excuse. She stopped. I learned not to go against her. I've been learning that my whole life, and I've gotten very good at it, and I don't know what I am without it. The gardenias in the corner of the room smelled like every formal occasion of our childhood. I know, I said, and I did. That was the complicated truth of my sister. She wasn't a villain. She was a person who had been shaped by the same house I'd been shaped by, and had chosen the path of least resistance. So many times it had become the only path she knew. That didn't make what she'd done okay, but it made it human. Marcus is a good person, I said. She looked up. Something softened. He is. I know. I've worked with him for 7 months. A sound came out of her that was almost a laugh. I know. He told me. When he figured it out, in the courtyard, he came to find me, and he said, she stopped. He said, your sister is exceptional at her work. I need you to tell me what happened between your family, and I need you to be honest. What did you tell him? The truth, she said quietly. All of it. For the first time. We looked at each other. Go get married, Sophia, I said. She stood, smoothed her dress, looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. At herself, really looked, and then looked back at me. Will you stay? She asked. For the ceremony? I hadn't planned to. I had planned to leave after the anteroom, make my point, make my presence real, and go. Yes, I said. I sat in the back row. My mother was at the front, in the family section, in her structured navy dress. She did not look back. My father was beside her. He glanced back once, found me immediately, the way people find things they've been looking for, and held my gaze for a moment, before facing forward. Marcus stood at the altar with the ease of a man who had made peace, in the last 2 hours, with a significant amount of unexpected information, and decided that the most important fact was the one standing across from him in a white dress. When Sophia came down the aisle, she was radiant. That's not sentiment. It's just true. Whatever had been held tight in her, in that bridal suite, had loosened slightly, and it showed in the way she moved. She didn't look at me, but at the very last moment, just before she reached the altar, just before she turned fully to Marcus, she glanced, briefly, to the back row, found me, a look that lasted less than a second, and contained the entire complicated history of 2 sisters raised in the same house, who had loved each other poorly and not known how to do better. I nodded once. She turned to Marcus. The ceremony proceeded. I left before the reception, not because I'd been asked to, not because anything had gone wrong. I left because I had done what I came to do. I had existed, fully, in front of the people who had decided I didn't exist, and anything after that felt like staying past the point of the visit. Harold was waiting near the parking area. We walked out together through the October afternoon, the string quartet's music floating through the trees behind us. "The Hayes family will want a conversation next week," he said. "Arthur Sr. specifically. The dynamic has shifted. I know. Your mother may instruct a lawyer to review the estate documents, looking for a challenge. She won't find one. You made sure of that." "I did," he said, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who is very good at his work. "But be prepared for noise before the silence." He reached his car, paused. "Your grandfather," he said, "came to my office 3 times before he finalized that codicil. He was very precise about what he wanted, very clear." He looked at me. The last time he came in, he was already starting to slip a little, but before we got to the documents, he asked me something. I waited. He asked me if I thought the city was still the kind of place where a woman with real talent could build something that lasted. Harold picked up his briefcase. I told him yes. He said, "Good, because she will." He nodded once, got in his car. I stood in the Serenbe parking lot while the reception music started somewhere behind the trees, and the Georgia afternoon came down golden and indifferent around me, and I thought about my grandfather in an attorney's office on Peachtree Street, already losing pieces of himself, making sure I had something solid to stand on. 6 months later, Inman Park, a Sunday morning in April, which in Atlanta means the dogwoods are doing what they do, reckless, temporary, extraordinary. My balcony faces east, and the light comes in early, and the coffee I make is never quite as good as the coffee from the place on Euclid Avenue, but I make it anyway, because the ritual matters. Danny comes over most Sundays now. She brings the good coffee, and I provide the balcony, and we watch the neighborhood do its thing. This particular Sunday, she arrives and sets 2 cups on the small table between our chairs and says, without preamble, "So, do you feel like you won?" I've been thinking about how to answer that question for 6 months. The Decatur development broke ground in March. My name is in the foundation documents, literally, in the legal filings, in the partnership records, in the architectural plans. A corner lot in Decatur that my grandfather bought 30 years ago and nobody else thought to value is becoming something real and lasting that will exist in Atlanta's medical landscape long after everyone in that Serenbe courtyard has moved on to whatever comes next. Whitfield Creative has 3 full-time employees now. We turned down 2 projects this quarter because we didn't have capacity. I'm being selective, which is the version of success I'm most proud of. Not the size of it, but the choice of it. My father calls on the first Sunday of every month. We talk for maybe 20 minutes. It's careful and it's incomplete, and it is, nonetheless, more honest than anything we managed in the 20 years before. I don't know what it becomes. I've stopped needing to know in advance. My mother has not called. I don't wait for it anymore. Sophia texted me in January. A photo, her and Marcus in what looked like Costa Rica, both of them sunburned and laughing. Below it, 1 line. He says hi. So do I. I looked at that photo for a long time, then I saved it. Beverly Hayes has become something I don't have a precise word for. Not quite a mentor, not quite a friend, but someone who shows up in my professional life with the particular consistency of a person who decided, without announcement, to be in your corner. We have lunch every few weeks at a place in Buckhead. She asks real questions and listens to the real answers. I think Grandpa Thomas would have liked her. Danny is still waiting for my answer. The dogwoods outside are doing their thing. The city is building, as it always is, indifferent to the personal histories playing out within it. I used to think winning would feel like watching them lose. I tell her, it doesn't. She wraps her hands around her coffee cup, waits. It feels like this, I say. Coffee, dogwoods, a building going up with my name in it. That's it? I think about my grandfather on a porch in Decatur. The afternoon light through the oak trees, the way he said you're going to be fine. Not fine like, okay. Fine like real, substantial. The kind of person who lasts. I think about being 20 years old in a parking garage, crying in a way I was ashamed of, unable to imagine that the ground under me could hold. I think about the drawer where I put the envelope. The 6 months I almost let it sit. The version of me who almost didn't call Harold Osei back. My grandfather left me something, I say. Not just the building, the knowledge that I had been seen. That one person looked at me and said, "She has value. She will know when." Danny is quiet. I spent a lot of years waiting to be understood, I say. By my mother, by my father, by a family that had already decided what I was before I knew what I could become. I pick up my coffee. I'm not waiting anymore. So what are you doing instead? I look out at the April morning, the dogwoods, the city, the particular gold of an Atlanta spring that arrives every year like it has somewhere to be. Building, I say. My mother once told me I was ugly. She didn't mean my face. She meant my choices, the way I'd taken what she considered a life of significance and traded it for something she couldn't evaluate on a resume. She said it quietly, without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. But here is what I know now that I didn't know then. My grandfather was a physician. He spent 40 years understanding the difference between what something looked like and what it actually was. He knew that the most important structures are often the ones you can't see from the outside. The foundations, the load-bearing walls, the things quietly holding everything up. He looked at me and saw a foundation. He was right. And the people who called me a defect, who closed doors and turned away, and decided, without looking closely, that I had nothing worth inheriting, they were standing on ground I helped build. They just didn't know it yet. I've thought about this a long time, whether I should have confronted them sooner, forgiven them faster, or stayed away entirely. I still don't have a clean answer, but I want to ask you something, and I mean it genuinely. If someone spent years making you invisible, and then life gave you the chance to make yourself undeniable in front of them, would you take it? Or would you walk away and never look back? I chose to show up. I'm still deciding if that was the right call. Tell me what you would have done.